The door to her office was open. That was the first thing wrong. Janet Wallace did not leave doors open. She stood in the hallway, laptop bag on her shoulder, the ink on a $140 billion merger agreement barely dry on her hands. 3 hours of handshakes, 2 years of quiet work. One signature that had just changed everything for everyone except the man she went home to. She stepped inside. Her desk was gone, her chair, the framed photo of her grandmother Dorothy gone. In its place, a rose gold keyboard, a ring light still warm, and a coffee mug that read "Good Vibes Only" in loopy white letters. Tara's mug. Cole appeared in the doorway behind her, leaned against the frame like a man who owned something. "I gave Tara a space to work. You barely use that office anyway." Janet looked at the mug, at the ring light, at the wall where Dorothy's photo used to be. Then she picked up her bag, turned around, and walked past him without a word. She didn't defend it. She documented it. Before we go any further, if this story is already hitting somewhere real, drop your country and the time where you are in the comments. I read every single one, and I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and ring the bell. Stories like Janet's come out every week, and you don't want to miss what happens next. There is a photograph Janet Wallace has kept in the bottom drawer of every desk she has ever owned. Not framed, not displayed. Just there folded, once edges soft, from handling tucked beneath contracts and quarterly reports like something she needed to be able to reach without thinking about it. In the photograph, a woman in her late 60s is sitting at a kitchen table covered in papers. Reading glasses pushed down her nose, a yellow highlighter between 2 fingers. She's not looking at the camera, she is working. That woman was Dorothy Wallace, and every single thing that was about to unfold had started with her. Dorothy Wallace had built Wallace Tech Ventures in 1989 out of a 2-room office in Atlanta with $12,000 a second-hand fax machine and a belief that Black women would one day own the infrastructure of American technology. Not work in it, not consult for it, own it. She spent 30 years being mostly right. By the time Janet was born, Wallace Tech was a quiet giant, the kind of company that didn't need press releases because the people who mattered already knew the name. Dorothy never advertised, never gave interviews, never walked red carpets. She just worked. And when Janet was 7 years old, Dorothy sat her down at that same kitchen table, pushed a sheet of paper across the surface, and said, "Read that." It was a balance sheet. "I don't know what this means," Janet had said. "You will," Dorothy replied, and went back to highlighting. By the time Janet turned 22, she knew exactly what it meant. She sat in Patricia Holt's office on a Tuesday morning in October. Bright windows, the smell of fresh coffee, a stack of legal documents 2 inches thick, and signed her name to the trust transfer that made her the sole owner and acting CEO of Wallace Tech Ventures, LLC. Patricia slid the final page across the desk. Watched Janet sign without hesitation. "Your grandmother used to sign the same way," Patricia said. Like she'd been waiting for it. Janet capped the pen. "She taught me to." She was 22 years old and had just inherited a company worth, at that moment, $4.3 billion. She told no one. Not her friends, not her mother, not the man she had been dating for 8 months who would 3 years later become her husband. Dorothy had been specific about that part. "And never show your hand at the table, baby. Not until you're ready to win." Janet had not been careless with that instruction. In the years that followed, she had done what Dorothy trained her to do. She worked. She expanded the portfolio. She hired quietly and fired decisively. She moved Wallace Tech from real estate and manufacturing into artificial intelligence infrastructure, cloud architecture, and biotech sectors that would triple in value inside a decade. She kept the company out of press, off social media. She ran it from a private office downtown that Cole had visited exactly once, stood in the lobby, looked around, said, "Nice building," and never asked another question. That was the thing about Cole. He never asked questions, not because he trusted her, but because he had already decided what she was, a quiet woman with a small job and a habit of working late, and questions would have required him to consider the possibility that he was wrong. She had married him anyway. She had thought once that his certainty was strength, that a man who moved through the world like he already owned it might be the kind of anchor she needed. It had taken 4 years to understand that certainty without curiosity was not strength. It was just noise. On the morning of the day, Cole gave her office to Tara. Simmons Janet Wallace was in a glass-walled conference room on the 41st floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan. Across the table from her sat the senior partners of Meridian Capital Group, 9 people in dark suits with 9 sets of eyes that had spent the last 2 years trying to find a single weakness in Wallace Tech's structure. They had not found one. The merger agreement, a $140 billion consolidation that would make Wallace Tech the largest privately held technology investment firm in North America, sat in the center of the table in a leather portfolio. Janet had read every page, twice. The night before, she had sat in her home office until 2 a.m. with a yellow highlighter between her fingers the way Dorothy used to. At 3:47 p.m., she signed her name. Janet Dorothy Wallace. The room exhaled. Someone ajar a bottle of water. The lead partner from Meridian extended his hand and said quietly, "It's been an honor, Ms. Wallace." She shook it, nodded once. At 3:52 p.m., her phone buzzed on the table. A text from Cole. "Dinner's going to be late. Made other plans. Don't wait up." She looked at the message for exactly 3 seconds. Then she put the phone face down, thanked the room, picked up her copy of the agreement, and walked out. She did not tell Cole what had happened that afternoon. She never had before. There was no reason to start now. She drove home through the kind of late afternoon light that makes a city look like it means something golden and long, cutting between buildings, landing soft on the windshield. She thought about Dorothy, about the kitchen table and the balance sheet and the yellow highlighter, about the photograph in the bottom drawer. She thought about a woman who had spent 30 years building something enormous and silent and permanent, and who had, on the last morning of her life, called Janet and said only, "It's yours now. Don't let them see it coming." Janet had promised. She had kept that promise for 12 years. And as she pulled into the driveway of the house she had purchased in full under her own name 2 months before the wedding, a fact that sat quietly inside a prenuptial agreement Cole had signed without reading, she thought that she might only need to keep it a little while longer. The lights were on inside. She could see 2 silhouettes through the kitchen window. She sat in the car for a moment, just a moment. Then she picked up her bag, got out, and went in. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the woman walking through that door had just closed the largest private merger in American history, and she hadn't told a single person in that house. Not yet. Diane Wallace arrived at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning the way she always arrived without calling first. The sound of her car in the driveway was its own kind of announcement, a black sedan always freshly washed, pulling in just far enough to make clear that she considered this her property too. Janet had learned in 9 years of marriage that there was no point in being surprised by it. Diane did not believe in boundaries the way other people did. She believed in access, and she had never once considered that access to her son's house was not the same thing as access to his wife's life. Janet was in the kitchen when she heard the door open. She did not go to the entrance hall. She poured a second cup of coffee, set it on the counter for no one in particular, and waited. Diane's heels were loud on the hardwood floor. She had a particular way of walking through spaces she wanted to dominate each step landing with just enough weight to remind the room who had entered it. Janet had noticed it the first time she ever met the woman at a family dinner 7 months before the wedding, and had filed it away the way she filed most things, quietly, completely, without comment. "Cole said you redecorated the study." Diane's voice came from the hallway before she appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at Janet the way she always did, a slow top-to-bottom assessment, like she was checking inventory. "I moved some things," Janet said. "Tara has good taste." Diane set her purse on the kitchen island, Janet's kitchen island, and looked around the room as if calculating what else might have changed. She picked out those curtains in the front room. "Did you notice very clean, very current?" Janet noticed. She said nothing. Tara had arrived in their lives the way bad weather sometimes did, gradually and then all at once. First a name mentioned in passing, then a presence at Cole's office events, then somehow a standing invitation to Sunday dinners that Janet had never extended and Cole had never explained. Diane had welcomed her immediately. That, more than anything, had told Janet what she needed to know. Diane was not a woman who warmed to people quickly. She was precise in her affections, deliberate in her approvals. For Tara to have earned her favor so fast meant that Diane had already decided what Tara was for and what, by extension, she intended Janet to become. A memory, a first wife, a name on a previous document. Janet picked up her coffee cup, took a slow sip, watched Diane open her refrigerator without asking. "Cole tells me you've been working late again," Diane said, not looking up from the refrigerator shelves. "Every week it's something, a meeting, a call, a project." She said the word project the way someone might say excuse. A wife who won't tell her husband what she does all day is hiding something shameful. She said it conversationally, like a fact she was simply reporting. Janet set her cup down. "I'm not hiding anything shameful," she said. Diane turned finally and looked at her directly. There was something almost satisfied in her expression, the satisfaction of a woman who had said a true thing out loud and gotten a reaction from it. "Then what are you hiding?" The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed. A neighbor's dog barked twice and stopped. "Nothing you'd understand," Janet said. and she picked up her cup, walked past Diane, and went down the hall. She stood in the doorway of what had been her office. Tara's ring light was on, plugged into the wall socket that Janet had once used for her laptop charger. Tara's coat was draped over the back of the chair. On the desk, beside the Good Vibes Only mug, there was now a small frame photo Cole and Tara at what looked like a rooftop restaurant, his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Janet looked at it for a long time, not with anger. With the particular stillness that comes after anger has passed through and left something harder in its place. She thought about the merger documents in her bag, about the conference room in Midtown, about the leather portfolio and the 9 partners, and the handshake that had made her, in the eyes of American financial law, the controlling owner of $140 billion. She thought about Dorothy. Never let them see it coming. She pulled out her phone. She did not go back into the kitchen. She stood in the hallway close enough to the study to hear Tara and Diane talking on the other side of the wall. Their voices were low, but not careful, the voices of people who did not believe they were being overheard. "She's strange," Tara said, "like she never gets upset." "It's almost calculated," Diane finished. A pause. "She's always been like that. Since the beginning. Cole thinks it's calm. I've always thought it was something else." "What do you mean?" Diane's voice dropped further, but the wall was thin, and Janet had very good hearing. "A woman that quiet always has something she's protecting. I've been saying it for years. She won't show her finances, won't discuss her work, won't introduce Cole to a single colleague." A sound, a cup being set down. "She's hiding something. I don't know what it is. But when Cole files, we'll find out." Janet stood very still. Then she pressed her back against the wall, looked down at her phone, and opened her contacts. Patricia Holt. 1 tap. It rang once. "Janet?" "It's time," Janet said. 3 words. No explanation needed. Patricia had been waiting for this call for the better part of a year. "How soon?" Patricia asked. Janet looked down the hallway toward the sound of Diane's voice. "Soon?" she said. "But not yet. Let them talk. Let them plan." A pause. "I want them to think they know exactly what they're doing when they walk into that room." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother used to say the same thing," she said finally. "I know," Janet said. "She taught me." She hung up, slid the phone into her pocket, straightened her back. Down the hall, Diane laughed at something Tara said, bright and easy and completely unaware. Janet walked to the front door, picked up her keys, and left the house without saying goodbye. She didn't need to announce departures, only arrivals. The nameplate appeared on a Thursday. Janet noticed it on her way to the kitchen, a small brass rectangle screwed into the door of what had been her office, what had been her grandmother's office before that, in the years Dorothy used to visit and work from the house during long weekends. The engraving was clean and centered. Tara Simmons, creative director. Janet stood in front of it for 11 seconds. She counted without meaning to the way she sometimes counted things when she needed her mind to stay level while the rest of her adjusted to something. Then she went and made coffee. Tara had moved in gradually, the way water moves into a structure, finding every small opening and settling there until the damage became architectural. First the desk, then the ring light and the mug and the photo of her and Cole, then a small white shelf unit flat-packed and assembled over a weekend while Janet was downtown. Then curtains, different ones, pale pink, replacing the gray linen Janet had chosen 4 years ago. And now a nameplate. Creative director. Cole had not mentioned the title. He had not mentioned any of it. He operated, Janet had come to understand, on the assumption that what he did not explain could not be questioned. It was a technique that had probably worked on other people. It had never worked on her. But she had let him believe it did, because a man who thinks his methods are invisible is a man who stops being careful. And Cole had stopped being careful a long time ago. The family dinner happened on a Friday night. Cole had invited his mother and his younger brother Marcus, a quiet man Janet had always liked, the only Wallace who seemed to occupy a room without trying to own it. He arrived with a bottle of wine and a slightly apologetic expression, the way he usually did when he suspected the evening would require it. Tara arrived 12 minutes after Diane. She walked in with the ease of someone who had been given permission, a permission Janet had never granted and Cole had never acknowledged needing to ask for. She wore a fitted burgundy dress and carried a small dish of something she had apparently cooked, which she set on the counter with a quiet, "I brought dessert," directed at Diane, rather than at the woman whose kitchen it was. Diane smiled like she'd been expecting it. Janet put the roast on the table. The seating happened the way Janet knew it would. Cole at the head, Diane to his right, Marcus across from Diane, and Tara pulled out the chair to Cole's left, the chair Janet had sat in for 9 years of Friday dinners. The chair that was in no legal or formal sense assigned to anyone but which had been hers long enough to carry the particular gravity of habit. She sat in it without hesitation. Cole did not say anything. Janet looked at the empty chair across from Marcus, sat down, unfolded her napkin. Marcus met her eyes from across the table. Something moved across his face, not quite apology, not quite warning. He looked down at his plate. Tara made a soufflé, Diane announced with the enthusiasm of a woman presenting evidence. Chocolate, Tara confirmed, smiling at Cole. Janet doesn't cook much anymore, Diane added without looking at Janet. Too busy with her projects. She said projects the same way she always did. Janet passed the breadbasket to Marcus. How's the firm treating you? She asked him. Marcus accepted the basket, grateful for the redirect. Good, busy. A pause. Very good, Janet said. Busy. Across the table, Cole was laughing at something Tara had said, low and easy, the laugh he used when he wanted someone to know they were charming him. Janet had not heard that laugh directed at her in 2 years. She ate her dinner. She watched. After the plates were cleared, after Tara's soufflé had been served and praised, and the bottle of wine Marcus brought had been finished, Janet excused herself. She went to the bedroom, closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet. From down the hall came the sound of the living room, Diane's voice, Tara's laugh, Cole's low commentary on something. The sound of a household rearranging itself around a new center of gravity, as if the rearrangement had already been decided, and only the formalities remained. Janet reached into the drawer of her nightstand. She had kept a copy of the prenuptial agreement there since the week after the wedding. Not because she expected to need it, she had truly hoped that she would never need it, but because Dorothy had told her once, keep your important papers close, not in a safe, close, where you can touch them at 3 a.m. if you need to remind yourself what's real. She took it out now, 42 pages, Patricia's firm letterhead on the first page, Cole's signature on the last large casual, the signature of a man who had not read what he was signing because he had been too proud to ask what it meant. Janet turned to page 7. All assets held under the name Janet Dorothy Wallace, including but not limited to Wallace Tech Ventures, LLC, and all subsidiary holdings, shall remain the sole and exclusive property of Janet Dorothy Wallace, irrespective of the duration or dissolution of the marriage. She read it once. Then she took out her phone, opened the camera, and photographed every page. Sent the images to Patricia with a single line. He's not being careful anymore. Neither is she. Patricia's reply came in under a minute. Good. Let them keep going. Janet slid the agreement back into the drawer, lay back on the bed, looked at the ceiling. Down the hall, Tara laughed again. Cole said something Janet couldn't quite hear. Diane's voice, warm and approving, filled in beneath it like a score. She had sat at that table for 9 years. She would not be sitting there much longer. Patricia Holt had been a corporate attorney for 27 years. She had drafted mergers, dissolved partnerships, protected estates, and sat across from some of the most aggressive legal minds in the country without blinking. She had won cases that other lawyers had quietly advised their clients to settle. She had on 3 separate occasions been described in legal trade publications as someone who read contracts the way other people read maps, not just for where they were going, but for every road that had been deliberately left off. Dorothy Wallace had hired her in 1991. She had never stopped working for the Wallace women since. She called Janet on a Monday morning, 9 days after Janet had sent the photographs of the prenuptial agreement. I need you to come in, Patricia said. No preamble. Patricia never used preamble when something was serious. When? Janet asked. Now would be good. Janet arrived at Patricia's office at 11:15. The building was the kind that did not advertise itself, no logo in the lobby, no name on the directory. Just a floor number and a receptionist who knew exactly who was expected and who was not. Patricia was at her desk when Janet walked in. The desk was covered, as it always was, in the organized chaos of someone who kept everything and forgot nothing stacked. Folders, color-coded tabs, 2 open laptops angled toward each other like they were having a conversation. She looked up when Janet entered, gestured at the chair across from her. Sit down. Janet sat. Patricia turned one of the laptops to face her. 3 weeks ago, Patricia began, Cole Wallace opened a business credit line under the name Wallace Family Holdings, LLC. She tapped the screen. That entity does not currently exist as a registered company, but the name he used on the application, she paused. He listed Wallace Tech Ventures as a related holding. The room was very quiet. Janet looked at the screen, at the application, at Cole's handwriting in the signature field, the same large casual signature she had seen on the prenuptial agreement 9 years ago. "He's trying to create a paper trail," she said. "Not a question. He's trying to create a legal association," Patricia corrected, "between himself and Wallace Tech. If he can establish even loosely, even informally, that he had a role in or connection to that company during the marriage, he has grounds to contest the prenuptial protections. It's a long shot, but it's not nothing." Janet was quiet for a moment. "Does he know what Wallace Tech is worth?" "Not yet." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "His lawyer probably gave him a number, a range, something that made it worth trying." She folded her hands on the desk. "But here's what interests me. The application was filed 11 days ago. The merger closed 14 days ago, which means someone told him," Janet said. "Someone told him something," Patricia agreed. "Not everything, but enough to make him move." They sat with that for a moment. Janet thought about Diane, about the thin wall and the low voice and the words that had drifted through when Cole files will find out. "His mother," Janet said. "Probably." Patricia opened a second folder. "There's more." Inside the folder were printed emails. Janet recognized the format, a legal firm's internal correspondence, the kind that required a court order or a very well-placed source to obtain. "How did you get these?" Janet asked. "I have good relationships," Patricia said in the tone she used when she meant to say absolutely nothing further on the subject. "Cole's attorney sent a preliminary discovery request to 3 financial institutions last week. He's looking for assets in your name. Personal accounts, investment vehicles, anything that can be characterized as marital property." She turned the page. "He also requested that you provide a full accounting of your professional activities and income for the past 12 years. Janet looked at the page. "He's building a case," she said. "He's building what he thinks is a case," Patricia said. "What he's actually building is a very detailed record of everything he attempted to do, which will matter enormously when we respond." She closed the folder, looked at Janet directly. "Here is what I want to do. I want to let him continue. Every application he files, every document his attorney requests, every financial institution he contacts, all of it becomes part of the record. We don't respond. We don't object. We don't give him any indication that we know what he's doing." "And then?" Janet asked. "And then," Patricia said, "when he walks into a room believing he has a complete picture, we show him what the picture actually looks like." Janet drove back through the city with the windows down. She thought about Cole sitting at his desk, or perhaps at a restaurant with his attorney sketching out what he imagined was a strategy, constructing arguments around a version of Janet that had never existed, a woman with a small job and modest savings and no particular leverage. She thought about Tara's nameplate on the office door, about Diane's voice through the wall, about the 9 people in a Midtown conference room who had stood when Janet entered, who had called her Ms. Wallace with a particular deference that had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with what she owned. Cole had been in her life for 12 years. He had never once stood when she entered a room. She stopped at a red light. A woman crossed the street in front of her brisk, purposeful laptop bag, on one shoulder phone already out. The light turned green. Janet drove on. They weren't going to stop him. They were going to let him finish. Every document, every application, every late-night call to his attorney, all of it was evidence. And Cole Wallace had always been a thorough man. The private investigator's name was Derek Marsh. He drove a gray sedan and charged $400 a day plus expenses, and he had been following Janet Wallace for 11 days before Patricia's source flagged the billing invoice to a shell account connected to Cole's personal attorney. Patricia laid the invoice on her desk and looked at it the way she looked at most things that confirmed what she had already suspected without surprise, but with a particular satisfaction that came from being right about the kind of person she was dealing with. She photographed it, filed it, added it to the folder that was growing thicker by the week. Derek Marsh was not a bad investigator. He documented Janet's movements with reasonable accuracy, her arrivals and departures from the downtown office building, the cars she drove, the restaurants, where she sometimes took lunch meetings with people whose names he could not identify because they arrived in private vehicles and did not wear name badges. What he could not document was what those meetings were about, what was said, what was decided, what was signed. He submitted his report to Cole's attorney on a Wednesday afternoon. The report concluded in the careful language of a man being paid to find something and unable to find it, that Janet Wallace appeared to maintain a regular professional schedule at an address in Midtown met with a consistent group of associates, and displayed no unusual financial behavior visible from external observation. No unusual financial behavior visible from external observation. Cole's attorney read that line twice and called Cole. "She's careful," the attorney said. "Whatever she has, it's well protected." "So we find another way," Cole said. The other way was Diane. She arrived at Cole's apartment, the one he had quietly rented 2 months earlier, a fact Janet had known about for 6 weeks through a forwarded piece of mail on a Thursday evening, with a leather portfolio and the particular energy of a woman who had been waiting to be useful. Cole poured 2 glasses of whiskey. Diane sat across from him at the kitchen table and opened the portfolio. Inside were documents, not real documents. Reconstructed ones, a version of Janet's professional history assembled from public records, LinkedIn searches, and the deliberate omission of anything that complicated the narrative Diane had decided was true. The portfolio presented Janet Wallace as a part-time consultant with no fixed employer, inconsistent income, and no substantial independent assets. "Your attorney can use this to establish that her financial contributions to the marriage were minimal," Diane said, "which supports your claim on the shared property." Cole looked at the documents. At his mother's handwriting in the margins, notations cross-references the work of someone who had spent considerable time on this. "Where did you get these?" "I compiled them," Diane said simply, "from available sources. And if she produces her own records, then we challenge their authenticity." Diane picked up her glass. "She has no witnesses, Cole. No colleagues you've ever met. No employer who's ever called the house. Whatever she claims to do, she's done it in complete secrecy." She paused. "Secrecy that a court may find suspicious." Cole was quiet for a moment, then he took the portfolio. What neither of them knew, what they could not have known, was that the apartment building Cole rented had a lobby with a security camera system that stored footage for 90 days. Patricia's firm had a contact in the building's management company. The footage of Diane entering with the leather portfolio, staying for 2 hours and 19 minutes, and leaving without it was retrieved and stored on an encrypted drive in Patricia's office by Friday morning. Additionally, Cole's attorney had sent the compiled documents to 2 financial institutions as part of his discovery filing. Both institutions were required by law to log the submission and retain it. Both logs were accessible with the right requests, which Patricia made through proper legal channels before the end of the business week. And additionally, the email chain between Cole's attorney and Derek Marsh, including the original brief, the surveillance report, and the invoice for 11 days of work, had been obtained through a source Patricia declined to name, printed and added to the folder that now required its own drawer. By the end of that week, Patricia had documented 1 hired private investigator, 11 days of unauthorized surveillance, 1 set of fabricated financial documents, 1 conspiracy between Cole and his mother to misrepresent Janet's assets to a court, and 1 signed prenuptial agreement that made every element of that conspiracy not only futile but potentially criminal. She called Janet on a Friday evening. "He submitted the false documents to 2 banks this week," she said. Janet was in her office. The real one, downtown 41st floor city, spread out below the windows in the particular amber of a late Friday. She had been reviewing the post-merger integration reports, numbers that would have made Cole's attorney cancel his weekend plans. "Both banks," she said. "Both." A pause. "He's thorough, Janet. I'll give him that." "His mother," Janet said. "His mother assembled them. His attorney submitted them. There are email records of both." Patricia's voice carried the quiet weight of someone setting down something heavy and permanent. "This is no longer just a divorce case." The word landed in the room and stayed there. "How much more do we need?" Janet asked. "A little more," Patricia said. "Let him file the petition. Let him walk into a room thinking he has everything." A pause. "Then we answer." Janet looked out at the city below. Somewhere across it, Cole was in his rented apartment, probably pouring a second whiskey, probably telling Tara that everything was under control. He handed Patricia everything she needed. He just didn't know it yet. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, not by mail, not through an attorney's office, delivered with the neutral professionalism that the legal system generally preferred for such things. Cole had them hand-delivered a process server in a dark jacket, who rang the doorbell at 8:47 in the morning while Janet was standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee that had not yet cooled enough to drink. She opened the door. The man handed her the envelope without making eye contact, said her name as a formality, left. She closed the door, set the envelope on the kitchen counter beside her coffee, looked at it for a moment, then she picked up her cup and drank. She had known it was coming. Not because of anything Cole had said. He had said very little to her directly in the past several weeks, operating instead through a series of absences and arrangements that communicated his intentions without requiring him to articulate them. But because Patricia had told her 4 days earlier that the filing was imminent, that Cole's attorney had indicated to the court clerk that papers would be submitted before the end of the week. "Are you ready?" Patricia had asked. "I've been ready," Janet said. And she had been. Not in the way that implied eagerness she had not wanted this had, not if she was honest with herself in the particular quiet of 3 a.m. ever wanted this. She had wanted once a long time ago the version of Cole she had believed existed before she understood that the certainty she had mistaken for strength was simply the absence of doubt, and the absence of doubt in a man who had never been required to question himself was not a virtue. It was just a limitation he had never been asked to outgrow. She had grieved that version of him years before the papers arrived. What she felt now standing in the kitchen with the envelope on the counter was something closer to clarity. She did not open the envelope immediately. She showered, dressed, made a second cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table with the morning light coming through the window at the angle it always came, in October low and slightly sideways, catching the dust motes in the air and making them visible. Then she opened the envelope. 40 pages. Standard dissolution filing. Cole's attorney had been thorough, she would grant him that. The petition cited irreconcilable differences, requested an equitable division of marital assets, and included a preliminary asset schedule that listed the House 2 vehicles, a joint savings account, containing $43,000, and she paused here a line item described as undisclosed professional holdings estimated value, TBD, subject to full financial disclosure by respondent. Undisclosed professional holdings. She read the line twice. They knew something. Not everything. If they had known everything, the language would have been specific, but they knew enough to know there was something defined. She turned to the last page. The signature line for Cole was already filled in his name in the large, unhurried script she had known for 12 years, signed with the ease of a man who believed the document in his hands was the beginning of his advantage. Below his signature line was hers. Respondent Janet Wallace. She picked up the pen from the table, and in the space provided in letters that were smaller than Cole's, more precise, each character fully formed, she wrote her full name. Janet Dorothy Wallace. 3 words. The third one was the one that mattered. She had not used her middle name casually since Dorothy died. It appeared on her company registration, on her trust documents, on the prenuptial agreement Cole had signed without reading, on every legal instrument that connected her to Wallace Tech Ventures and to the $140 billion that now sat formally and irrevocably under that name. It did not appear on their marriage certificate. It did not appear on any of the household accounts, the joint mortgage, the shared utilities. Cole had known her as Janet Wallace for 12 years. Just Janet Wallace. The quiet woman with the small job and the late evenings and the habit of not explaining herself. He had never once asked her what the D stood for. She set down the pen, looked at what she had written, picked up her phone and photographed the signature page, sent it to Patricia with no message. Patricia would understand. The reply came in 40 seconds. His attorney will run it by end of day. Call me tonight. Janet folded the papers back into the envelope, set it on the counter in the place she had decided it would be found visible, deliberate, impossible to miss. Then she heard the front door. Cole came in with Tara behind him and Diane behind her, the 3 of them filling the entrance hall with the particular energy of people who believed they were arriving at a conclusion. Cole was dressed well. Tara had a small smile that she was not quite managing to contain. Diane's eyes went immediately to the envelope on the counter. "You got the papers," Cole said, not a question. "I signed them," Janet said. He looked at the envelope. Something crossed his face, not quite relief, not quite satisfaction, the expression of a man who had expected resistance and was recalibrating in its absence. "Good," he said. "That's good." Diane picked up the envelope, slid out the signature page, looked at the name Janet had written. Her eyes stopped. Something shifted in her expression, small, quick there and then gone, like a woman who had just seen a word she recognized from somewhere she could not immediately place. She looked up at Janet. Janet looked back at her calmly. "Is something wrong?" Janet asked. Diane put the page back in the envelope, set it down. "No," she said, but her voice had changed. Something in it, some register of certainty, had gone slightly hollow. Cole did not notice. He didn't know that name yet, but his lawyer would. Cole's attorney was a man named Bernard Cross. He had practiced family law for 19 years, had handled 17 high-asset divorce cases, and had built a reputation in the city as someone who was aggressive without being reckless, a distinction that mattered in courtrooms where judges had long memories and short patience for theatrics. He was also, by his own admission to colleagues, thorough. He ran every name. He received the signed response documents from Cole's process server at 4:18 in the afternoon, opened the envelope at his desk, reviewed the pages in the methodical way he reviewed everything from the front, slowly noting anything that required follow-up. He reached the signature page at 4:26. Janet Dorothy Wallace. He looked at it for a moment. The middle name was not in any of the documents his team had compiled during the discovery phase. Not on the marriage certificate, which listed her simply as Janet Wallace. Not on the joint accounts, the mortgage, the vehicle registrations. Nowhere in the 8 weeks of financial background work his paralegal had assembled. 3 names instead of 2 was not unusual, but something about the third name pulled at something in the back of his mind, the particular instinct of a man who had spent 19 years reading documents and learning to notice the things that did not fit the established pattern. He typed the full name into the search bar of the corporate registry database his firm subscribed to. Janet Dorothy Wallace. The result appeared in 4 seconds. He read it once. Then he leaned back in his chair and read it again more slowly, the way a person reads something when the first reading has not yet persuaded them that the words mean what they clearly mean. Wallace Tech Ventures, LLC. Registered owner and CEO, Janet Dorothy Wallace. Asset classification, private investment fund, technology sector. Post-merger valuation. He stopped reading, picked up his phone. Called Cole. Cole was at the apartment with Tara when the call came in. They had ordered food Italian containers spread across the kitchen counter, and Tara was telling him something about a design project she was working on, something that required his opinion on 2 shades of the same color, and he was nodding along with the practiced attention of a man whose mind was mostly somewhere else. His phone lit up. Bernard Cross. 9:52 p.m. His attorney did not call at 9:52 in the evening about ordinary matters. He excused himself, walked into the bedroom, closed the door. Bernard? I need you to sit down, Bernard said. Cole did not sit down. He stood in the center of the bedroom with one hand at his side and the other holding the phone against his ear. What is it? The name on the response documents. Janet Dorothy Wallace. A pause. The pause of a man choosing his next words with the care of someone who understood they were about to change the shape of a conversation permanently. I ran it through the corporate registry. Cole, your wife is the registered owner and CEO of Wallace Tech Ventures, LLC. Silence. What is Wallace Tech? It's a private technology investment fund, Bernard said. One of the largest in the country. It completed a merger 14 days ago. Another pause. The post-merger valuation is $140 billion. The number entered the room and stayed there. Cole said nothing. The food was getting cold in the kitchen. Tara was saying something. He could hear her voice through the door, slightly muffled, unaware. The apartment felt suddenly very small. The walls felt closer than they had 60 seconds ago. That can't be right, Cole said finally. His voice came out differently than he intended, smaller, flatter, like something had gone out of it. I verified it through 3 separate databases, Bernard said. The company has been operating under that name since 1989. Your wife has been the registered owner since she was 22 years old. A pause. Cole, the prenuptial agreement. Did you read it before you signed on? Silence. Cole. I read it, Cole said. He had not read it. He had skimmed the first page. Asked Patricia Holt, Janet's attorney. He now remembered Janet's attorney, whether it was standard. She had said yes. He had signed. I need to see the full text of that prenup before we go any further, Bernard said. If it was drafted to protect Wallace Tech specifically, if Janet's assets were enumerated and excluded before the marriage, then our position changes significantly. How significantly? Bernard was quiet for a moment. Significantly enough that I need you to come into the office tomorrow morning, he said. First thing, bring everything you have. Cole hung up. He stood in the bedroom for a long time without moving. Through the door, Tara's voice continued lighter now, laughing at something on her phone, completely unaware that the ground had just shifted beneath everything she thought she was standing on. He thought about the office he had given her, about the nameplate he had ordered Tara Simmons, creative director, screwed into the door of a room that Janet had never seemed to care about losing. He thought about Janet's face when she had found it, the way she had looked at the nameplate for a moment, then walked past it without a word. The stillness of her that he had always read as passivity, and was now reconfiguring rapidly and uncomfortably into something else entirely. He thought about the conference room she sometimes mentioned, the late evenings, the calls she took in the car with the windows up. He thought about every question he had never asked. He called Diane. It rang 3 times. Cole. Her voice was alert despite the hour. She had always been a light sleeper, and she had always picked up for him. "Mom?" He sat down on the edge of the bed. "Did you know?" A pause. "Know what?" "About Janet? About Wallace Tech?" Longer pause this time. "I knew she was hiding something," Diane said finally. "I told you that from the beginning." "That's not what I asked." Diane said nothing. In the silence between them, Cole understood that his mother had suspected more than she had known, perhaps that the thing Janet was hiding was large, even if she had not known its precise shape. Had pushed him toward the filing anyway, had assembled the false documents anyway, had calculated that the risk was worth taking. "Get a lawyer, Mom," Cole said quietly. He hung up, sat in the dark bedroom of a rented apartment while in the kitchen food went cold in containers, and Tara laughed at something on her phone. The name had been there the whole time. He just never thought to look. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Bernard Cross had requested it, framed it in the formal language of legal correspondence as a settlement conference, a preliminary discussion between parties and their respective counsel to explore options before the matter proceeded to formal litigation. Neutral ground, he had suggested. A conference facility downtown. Patricia had counter-proposed Wallace Tech Ventures offices. Bernard had objected. Patricia had explained in 3 sentences why the location was legally appropriate given the assets under discussion. Bernard had consulted with Cole and called back 40 minutes later to confirm. They would meet at Wallace Tech. Janet arrived at 8:15. She took the elevator to the 41st floor alone, the way she always did in the early morning before the administrative staff arrived, before the phones began in the particular quiet of a building that had not yet decided to be busy. The reception desk was empty. The corridor lights were on their morning settings, slightly lower than full, the kind of light that made a space feel owned rather than occupied. She walked to her office, sat down at her desk the one that had always been here, the one that had nothing to do with the room Cole had reassigned, and opened the merger integration report she had been reviewing the previous evening. She read for 45 minutes. At 9, her assistant arrived and brought coffee. At 9:30, Patricia came in, set her briefcase on the conference table, and opened it with the unhurried precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment for considerably longer than the other side realized. "They'll be here in 30 minutes, Patricia said. "I know," Janet said. "How are you?" Janet considered the question genuinely the way Patricia always intended it. "Clear," she said. Patricia nodded. That was enough. They arrived at 10:04. Cole came in first, dressed carefully, the charcoal suit expression, arranged into something between composure and defiance, the look of a man who had spent the previous night convincing himself he still had leverage. Bernard Cross came in behind him, briefcase in hand, eyes moving immediately and professionally around the room, assessing, calculating, filing. Diane came in last. She had not been on the attendee list. Bernard had not mentioned her. She simply appeared in the doorway behind Cole-structured burgundy blazer, small, sharp eyes moving across the room with the instinctive surveillance of a woman who had spent 62 years treating every space she entered as a territory to be evaluated. Her eyes found Janet. Janet looked back at her from across the conference table without expression. Patricia pulled out a chair. "Please sit down." They sat. Cole directly across from Janet, Bernard to his left. Diane, uninvited and unacknowledged in the formal sense, took the chair at the far end of the table as though she had been assigned it. Patricia remained standing. She waited until everyone had settled, until the room had reached the particular stillness of people who understood that what was about to happen would not be brief and would not be comfortable. Then she opened her briefcase and removed a single bound document which she placed in the center of the table. Nobody reached for it. "Before we discuss settlement terms," Patricia said, "I want to establish the factual foundation of this matter, because I think there may be some confusion on one side of this table about what assets are actually under discussion." Bernard Cross straightened slightly. "We're aware of Wallace Tech Ventures." "I'm sure you are," Patricia said, "but I want to make sure everyone in this room understands what that means." She nodded toward the door. It opened. 6 people entered, the senior members of Wallace Tech's board of directors, each of whom Janet had personally recruited over the past decade. They arranged themselves along the wall to the right of the door in the quiet, unhurried manner of people who had been briefed and knew exactly why they were there. Every one of them nodded at Janet as they entered. Not at Cole, not at Bernard, not at Diane, at Janet. Cole watched them. Something moved across his face, an understanding arriving in pieces, each one heavier than the last. Patricia opened the bound document. "Wallace Tech Ventures, LLC," she read. Her voice was level, unhurried, filling the room completely. Registered owner and sole CEO, Janet Dorothy Wallace, founded 1989 by Dorothy Mae Wallace, asset classification private technology investment fund. Portfolio holdings across 43 companies in artificial intelligence, cloud architecture, and biotech infrastructure. She turned the page. Post-merger valuation as of 14 days ago. She looked up briefly at Cole. $140 billion. The number landed in the room the way large numbers do when spoken aloud in small spaces heavier than arithmetic, carrying something beyond mathematics. Cole was very still. Bernard had a pen in his hand that he was no longer moving. Diane's hand, Janet noticed, had moved to the edge of the table, gripping it, knuckles slightly pale against her brown skin. That can't be solely... Diane's voice came out thinner than usual, the practiced authority of it gone slightly reedy. She never said there's no way she... Patricia looked at her calmly. Diane stopped. She seemed to become aware in the sudden quiet that she was speaking, that the room was listening, that a recording device sat in plain view on the table, its small red light steady and patient. She released the edge of the table, said nothing more. Patricia turned back to the document. Additionally, she continued, I'd like to enter into the record the prenuptial agreement signed by both parties 9 years ago, which explicitly and comprehensively excludes all Wallace Tech assets and holdings from marital property consideration. Mr. Cross, I believe you requested a copy. Here it is. She slid a second document across the table. Bernard picked it up, read the first page, then the seventh, then the last. He set it down, did not look at Cole. Janet watched all of this from her chair at the head of the table. She had not spoken yet. She did not need to. The board members stood quietly along the wall. The recording device hummed. Patricia turned pages with the unhurried efficiency of a woman who had prepared for every response and was encountering none she had not anticipated. Cole looked at the chair Janet was sitting in, the chair at the head of the table. His mouth opened slightly, closed. He had been in this building once. He had stood in the lobby, looked around, and said, nice building. He had never asked whose it was. It had always been hers. The courtroom was smaller than Cole had imagined. He had pictured something grand, high ceilings, dark wood paneling, the kind of room that made proceedings feel significant by virtue of architecture alone. What he got was a civil court chamber on the 14th floor of a building that also housed a DMV office and a tax assessment bureau. Fluorescent lights, chairs with thin cushions. A judge who had been on the bench for 22 years and had seen every variation of human financial catastrophe that a marriage could produce. Her name was Judge Carolyn Reeves. She read documents the way Patricia did, completely without performance, making small notations in the margins with a mechanical pencil. She had been reading for 6 minutes when she looked up at Bernard Cross. Counselor, she said, I want to make sure I understand the respondent's prenuptial agreement correctly. Bernard straightened. Your Honor, this document, she continued, holding up the agreement Patricia had submitted, was signed by both parties 9 years ago. It explicitly excludes all assets held under the name Janet Dorothy Wallace, including Wallace Tech Ventures, LLC, and all subsidiary holdings from marital property consideration. She set it down. Is that your understanding as well? Bernard paused for exactly 1 second too long. That is yes, Your Honor. That is correct. And your client signed this document? He did. Voluntarily. Another pause. Yes. Judge Reeves made a notation, said nothing further for a moment. The courtroom was very quiet. Patricia stood. She presented the case in the order she had assembled it, methodically, without drama, the way a person lays out tools before beginning a precise and necessary task. First, the prenuptial agreement. Fully executed, legally unambiguous, protecting every asset held under Janet Dorothy Wallace's name from the date of marriage forward. Second, the post-merger valuation documentation from Wallace Tech, filed with the relevant regulatory bodies 14 days prior, publicly accessible, carrying the weight of federal financial disclosure requirements. Third, the private investigator invoices. 11 days of unauthorized surveillance, paid through a shell account connected to Cole's personal attorney, documented through billing records, subpoenaed in the week following the conference room meeting. Fourth, the fabricated financial documents. Patricia placed them on the stand with the care of someone handling something that did not deserve care, but required it for procedural reasons. 2 pages. Diane's handwriting in the margins. Submitted to 2 financial institutions as part of Cole's discovery filing. These documents, Patricia said, were compiled by Diane Wallace and submitted with the knowledge and authorization of the petitioner as part of a deliberate effort to misrepresent the respondent's financial standing to this court. She paused. We have email correspondence confirming both the assembly and the submission. She turned to the final exhibit, the conference room recording. She did not play the entire thing. She played 47 seconds, Diane's voice thin and unguarded, saying the words she had said in the moment before. She understood that the room was recording. That can't be hers. She never said. The judge listened without expression, made 3 notations. Bernard's response was measured and professional, and Janet thought, watching from the respondent's table, the work of a man doing his best with material that had stopped being workable approximately 2 weeks ago. He argued that the prenuptial agreement contained ambiguous language regarding Janet's professional activities during the marriage. Judge Reeves asked him to identify the specific language he considered ambiguous. He cited page 7. She read page 7 aloud, asked him to identify the ambiguity again. He could not. He argued that the fabricated documents had been submitted in good faith based on information available to his client at the time. Judge Reeves looked at the email chain confirming Diane's role in assembling them, set it down, said nothing. He argued that the surveillance had been a legitimate investigative measure taken by a spouse with reasonable cause for concern about undisclosed assets. Judge Reeves noted that reasonable cause for concern about undisclosed assets did not constitute legal authorization for private surveillance, and asked Bernard if he wished to continue that line of argument. He did not. Judge Reeves ruled at 2:17 in the afternoon. The prenuptial agreement was found fully enforceable. All Wallace Tech assets and holdings were confirmed as the sole property of Janet Dorothy Wallace, wholly excluded from marital consideration. The joint assets, the house, the vehicles, the $43,000 in the shared account were divided according to documented contribution, which the financial records established clearly. Cole received the vehicles and half the savings account. The house purchased in full by Janet before the wedding, under her name, a fact that had been in the prenuptial agreement on page 3, remained Janet's. Regarding the fabricated documents, Judge Reeves referred the matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential fraud and filing of false instruments charges. She noted for the record that both Cole Wallace and Diane Wallace had been identified in the relevant correspondence, and that the referral encompassed both parties. Bernard Cross wrote something in his legal pad. Cole sat beside him and looked at the surface of the table. Tara had left on a Wednesday. Not dramatically. No confrontation, no final conversation. Cole had come back to the apartment to find her things gone, the ring light, the good vibes, mug, the burgundy dress that had been hanging on the back of the bathroom door. A note on the kitchen counter that said in handwriting he had always found attractive, "I think we both knew this wasn't going to work out." That was all. He had stood in the kitchen for a long time after reading it, called her twice. The first time it rang out. The second time it went immediately to voicemail, the particular immediacy that meant someone had declined the call rather than simply missed it. He had not called again. On the afternoon of the ruling, he sat alone in the courthouse hallway on a wooden bench outside the chamber doors. The building moved around him, people with folders, clerks with trolleys, a family arguing quietly in a corner. The ordinary noise of a place where other people's lives were also being formally reconfigured. Diane had left before the ruling was read. She had received a call from her own attorney, a different attorney one she had contacted the week after the conference room meeting, and had walked out of the courtroom with the careful, controlled movement of a woman managing something she could not yet afford to show on her face. She had not looked at Cole as she left. Bernard Cross had packed his briefcase with the brisk efficiency of a professional closing a chapter and moved toward the elevator without further conversation. Cole sat on the bench. He thought about the nameplate. Tara Simmons, creative director. He had ordered it from an engraving shop on Clement Street, paid extra for same-day service, carried it home in a brown paper bag, and screwed it into the door himself with a small flathead screwdriver, feeling in that moment like a man making a decision. He had not thought about whose door it was. He had not thought about a lot of things. He sat alone in the courthouse hallway. The chair beside him was empty. It had been empty for a long time. She went back on a Thursday morning. Not because Thursday held any particular significance. It was simply the first morning after the ruling that her calendar was clear before 9, and she had decided sometime in the previous week that she wanted to be there early, before the staff arrived, before the phones. In the particular stillness of a building that belonged entirely to her, and had always belonged entirely to her, even during the years when she had not said so out loud, she took the elevator to the 41st floor. The doors opened onto the corridor she had walked 1,000 times, the same pale walls, the same low morning light, the same faint smell of the cleaning crew's work from the night before, something faintly citrus and institutional that she had always found oddly comforting. She walked to her office. Someone had been in before her. Not an intruder, her assistant she knew, who had a habit of arriving early on significant days with a thoroughness that went beyond job description. The desk had been cleared and reset. The chair repositioned to the exact angle Janet preferred. A fresh legal pad placed in the upper left corner of the desk Surface Pen aligned beside it. And on the windowsill in a small ceramic pot, she did not recognize a single white orchid. No note, just the flower placed where the morning light would find it first. Janet stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she walked in, set her bag on the chair, and sat down. The desk was the same desk she had used for 11 years. It was not the desk from the house that one had been removed the week Cole moved out, replaced by Tara's setup and then removed again when Tara's setup was itself removed, leaving the room in the house in the bare, slightly accusatory state of a space that had been used for purposes it was not intended for. This desk had always been here. Dark wood, 3 drawers on the right side, a surface wide enough to spread documents across without stacking them. A small scratch in the lower left corner from a moving dolly 12 years ago, the first week she had occupied the space. She had looked at the scratch then and decided it was character rather than damage and had never thought about it since. She ran her thumb across it now. Character. She opened the bottom drawer. It was there, the photograph. Folded once, edges soft from years of handling. She had moved it from the house 3 weeks ago, the day after the ruling, sliding it into her bag, without ceremony, the way you retrieve something you should not have left behind in the first place. She took it out now, unfolded it carefully. Dorothy at the kitchen table, reading glasses pushed down her nose, yellow highlighter between 2 fingers, not looking at the camera because there was work to be done and the camera was irrelevant to the work. Janet looked at it for a long time. She thought about the kitchen table and the balance sheet and the girl who had sat across from a woman she loved completely and said, "I don't know what this means." She thought about the answer. "You will." And she had. She had spent 12 years learning exactly what it meant. Not just the numbers, not just the legal structures and the investment portfolios and the merger agreements, but the deeper thing Dorothy had been teaching her. The thing underneath the balance sheets and the trust documents and the prenuptial agreement that a young woman had been wise enough to sign before she understood fully how much she would need it. The thing was this: that power, real power, did not announce itself. It did not perform. It did not require an audience or a moment of confrontation or a room full of witnesses to be real. It was simply there, quiet, steady, patient, waiting for the moment when it was needed. She placed the photograph on the corner of the desk. Not in a drawer this time, not folded, not hidden, just there, where she could see it. Dorothy at the kitchen table, working. Her coffee had cooled in the time she had been sitting. She picked it up anyway and held it in both hands, the ceramic warm enough still to be worth holding, and looked out the window at the city below. 41 floors down the street was beginning its morning delivery trucks. Early commuters, a woman walking a dog that was more interested in a lamppost than in moving forward. The sky was the particular pale blue of an October morning that had not yet decided how the day would go. Janet watched it. She thought about the conference room and Patricia's voice reading the numbers aloud, and the way Cole had looked at the chair at the head of the table, the understanding arriving in his face in pieces, each piece heavier than the last. She did not feel triumphant. She had expected to feel something sharper than this, some satisfaction with edges to it, some brightness. What she felt instead was quieter, and she thought better, the feeling of a thing completed. A weight set down after a long carry. The particular piece of a person who has done what was necessary and can now finally simply be still. At 8:45, she heard the elevator open down the corridor. Her assistant's footsteps, the sound of the reception desk being unlocked, a coffee maker beginning somewhere in the kitchen at the end of the hall. The building waking up, hers. Janet set down her coffee cup, straightened the legal pad on the corner of her desk, looked once more at the photograph of Dorothy, at the yellow highlighter, at the papers spread across the kitchen table, at the woman who had spent 30 years building something enormous and silent and permanent so that someone she loved would never have to ask permission to exist. She opened her laptop. The merger integration report was still on the screen where she had left it. She began to read. Outside the window, the October sky made up its mind, pale blue deepening towards something clear and certain, the kind of morning that did not require commentary. Strength isn't loud. It never had been. And sitting there at the desk that had always been hers in the building, that had always been hers in the life that through patience and precision and a promise kept to a woman with a yellow highlighter had always been entirely hers. Janet Wallace finally let herself breathe. The thing I keep coming back to in Janet's story isn't the money. It isn't the merger or the prenuptial agreement or the moment Patricia read that number out loud in a room full of people who had spent months trying to find something to take from a woman they had fundamentally misread. It's the photograph in the bottom drawer. The one Janet carried from desk to desk for 12 years, never displayed, never explained, just there, within reach. A woman with a yellow highlighter who taught her granddaughter that real strength doesn't need to be seen to be real. That patience is not the same thing as weakness. That the most powerful thing a person can sometimes do is simply refuse to show their hand until the moment is right. We live in a world that rewards loudness. That reads silence as absent stillness, as defeat restraint, as a lack of options. Cole made that mistake. Diane made that mistake. They looked at a woman who did not argue, did not explain, did not perform her power for their comfort, and they decided she had none. They were wrong. If any part of Janet's story lives in something you've experienced, the dismissal, the assumption, the slow erosion of being seen as less than you are, I want you to drop it in the comments. Where you're watching from, what it brought up, whatever you want to say, I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. Hit the button and ring the bell. Because every week there's another story, another woman who was underestimated, another truth that was patient enough to wait another moment when the room finally understood exactly who had been standing in it all along. Don't miss it.